I think you're on a delay.
I think I had something running that shouldn't have been. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Welcome to Nacht Waffen Pilot Presents. And today we have Eric J. Hecker back, and we're going to be talking about various CIA projects, most of which, well, we're at least going to start off with Project STARGATE, which was the remote viewing program that was run by Ingo Swann and Russell Targ. And this is all declassified CIA information. So you're not going to necessarily be targeted for listening to us.
Right. This one should be allowed to remain on the internet, technically.
Yeah, well, we all know that what is allowed and what isn't are often two different things.
Yes, and a lot of things as of late are being scoured voraciously, so we'll talk about this today, and we'll see what everybody thinks about it tomorrow, apparently.
Oh, I'm going to state for the record for the audience, Mr. Hecker was unceremoniously and without warning dumped from Facebook completely, and his page that was called Deciphering My Experience was deleted with him. So we have no idea what it was he said that pissed them off, but it did.
Yep.
So
and so, you know what? Maybe it's for the better. We'll find out. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I mean, it's Facebook. We all know that it's a double-edged sword. So you know what? It cut me. Do I need to get entangled with it? I don't know. Guess I'll go in another direction and see what happens. If people are interested in learning about the truth and following along, by all means, I'm not completely erased off of the internet yet. And fine folks like yourself are still engaging with me and sharing my stuff to the by all means. So I think it's a beautiful thing that as a community that we can pull together to hopefully keep connecting the dots against the forces that we know are lining up to prevent that from occurring. So be kind, like, subscribe, and share. This is the new modern way of supporting each other. So if you guys can simply do that for me, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, you need to read the words because most of our audience is on radio and can't see it.
Oh, I got you. My YouTube page is Deciphering My Experience. All together is one word. And if you want to find out more about what I've been discussing and my experiences and what I've seen, take a look. Check out the video. If you have questions, by all means, put them in the comments. If you think that there's other people that could be helped by the information that I'm putting out there, please put it in front of them so that we can all communicate and paint a bigger picture. I think of it like we're all artists, like working together on a giant painting, and each of us has the ability to come in and, put a couple of strokes to canvas. And when we all work together to do that, we as a community start making a big picture of what's going on. None of us have all of the answers.
And none of us own the canvas.
Correct. The truth is the truth. We've only been given a limited perspective of that truth. So yeah, absolutely. We don't even own the real estate, the paint. We're just a perspective. We're all trying to help each other out.
And I personally have this feel that the more the merrier, as long as we're all speaking our honest truth and not what we think people want to hear.
Understood. And yet it amazes me that sometimes, like you see in comments and exchanges, it amazes me sometimes that people still have this mindset of stories needing to match.
Yeah.
It blows my mind that, somebody would say, oh, well, if you were in the SSP, tell me this. And, oh, that story's different than that person's story. And it just makes me laugh, because if you were flying by the Earth and you grabbed an Earthling and you said to me, tell me exactly what Earth is like, and you did that to how many Earthlings? How many different stories are you going to get? Are they all liars?
Yeah, I had to explain recently to someone why our details don't match up.
Mm-hmm.
In my personal story, I was born. At 4 years old, I was taken to Langley for 5 years. Then I was taken to Mars for 25 years. Then I was on a ship for 25 years. Mm-hmm. Then I was brought back to 4 years old on Earth. So, I'm 65, or will be next month. So, everything that I remember, we're talking over 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, you think about the house that you lived in when you were 5 years old. What color was the carpet?
Brown.
What color was the outside of the house?
Yellow. I'm a lunatic.
What were the neighbors' names?
Well, I don't want to give them all out, but I could name them. I have problems. I remember things.
Yeah, I understand. That's what we're dealing with, though.
I know. Yes. Yep.
That's exactly what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I get the logic.
And you go back into these memories, and you might get the carpet color wrong. You might get, my house when I was 5 years old didn't have carpet.
Mm-hmm.
It had linoleum floors all through it. We were 3 children and 2 parents in a 2-bedroom house when I was 5. And my father built a teepee out of 2x4s and concrete.
Nice.
And that was in the backyard. So, and when we first moved there, the house we had lived in before had been a trailer house, and as a 5-year-old, I didn't know it had termites. And one of my most traumatic experiences from Earth was my parents pulling this trailer house into the backyard and setting it on fire to kill the termites.
That's one way to do it.
And it was like, I stood there and I was drawn to the fire. And my mom says, "You're a firebug. We have to keep an eye on you." So, but yeah, I had the draw into the flames at 5. Now, did that come from SSP, or was that something that would have happened anyway? I don't know.
Well, I mean, there's some interesting things that go with fire, because lest we forget, it is plasma. So there are attributes that can be played with it.
Yes, and I was used to playing with plasma on Mars. Mm-hmm. So that's what ran my ship, my fighter plane. Where it had a plasma engine, so I was used to playing with plasma. Mm-hmm. So. Yes, anomalies on Earth. So we're going to be talking about a program that you have reason to believe that you were involved in.
More so than ever.
So, yes. Now, for our audience, Eric is not at the final stages of remembering everything. Eric is at the stage of, I have these memories and I'm trying to figure out what the hell they were. And he's been doing a lot of research to go along those lines. So as we go along these interviews, and I hope there will be many, he's going to be giving out more and more information from his personal research, verifying his personal memories. So, don't expect anybody to have all the answers now.
And that basically is what I'm doing, is that in a way I'm a patient person, but in other ways I'm very impatient. So I very much wanted to to get involved with understanding myself and my personal experience, getting things dialed in. But I also felt impatient because I wanted to make connections with folks and share what I did know already to help them out. The things that I knew that was going on in their world and in their experience, where I could throw in my 2 cents and go, you know what, you're not out of your mind. I know something that supports your experience, so here's a little bit for you. But now that brings me into the conversation, and then people start to question me and where I've been, and it's like, I can only tell you what I know so far. And just like you said, I don't have all of the answers, but my pieces are mine, and you can't take that from me. So I'm throwing my hat into the ring and going, my pieces have value. I believe everybody else's pieces have value as well, but let's just see how they connect. I'm not going to connect to everybody. It's not going to make sense for everyone, and my piece won't fit every other piece, but it'll all make it into the big picture.
Now, what I want to state here for the audience, Eric paid for my partner and I to come to his house in July. We were there for a week. One of the things that went down was I held his documents in my hands, read them myself. Okay, he has been in the U.S. Navy. I have seen his DD-214. He was a submariner. He has been a plumber. I've seen documents where he worked for these companies. He has been at the Raytheon Antarctic base at the South Pole, the one that nobody gets to go to. I've seen his pay stubs and his shoulder patch and the award for, 300 degrees?
It's a...
So...
Yeah, the 300 Club, it's a ceremonial award, basically, but yes, that as well. Yes, thank you, because I don't like to get caught up in the minutia of proving things. I would like to just move forwards on that stuff, so thank you for clarifying that, because I do know that in this community, there are a lot of, I guess, gatekeepers and things like that that are trying...
There are both gatekeepers and there are frauds.
Correct. So
I'm saying I have seen your documents. You are not a fraud.
Right.
And the gatekeepers can go F themselves.
Correct. So this is also a very interesting dynamic, because this is I appreciate talking to you. I like that you give me the opportunity and that you respect where I'm coming from, because I happen to know that you've walked around in these circles for quite a few years now. And wouldn't you say it's rather interesting that someone like myself has now shown up on the scene, and these gatekeepers who've been kind of asking for this all along don't seem to know where my phone is at? You know? But
they don't know where mine is either, but, we do our thing anyway.
Correct. Exactly. So, with that being said, let's just get into what we know about what's been going on and what I have been finding out as of late. My favorite thing, first and foremost, that I think is so amazing, is I am seeing more chatter of what is, I guess, more commonly being referred to as gate kids, talking to each other on the internet. I think that's a wonderful thing, that people do seem to be waking up, that this program, as despicable as it may have been impacting so many people, I do like to see that they are apparently finding each other and helping each other out. I think that is fantastic. So
I agree. There's nobody that can help you better than someone else who was there.
Oh my God, it's so good to have peers. People really need to understand the value of having peers. Don't stand in the corner and hide in your misery. Go find people that you can commiserate with. You will feel better.
Yeah, you will.
Yeah.
And so will they.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had a bunch of people reaching out to me in the comments and through Gmail and stuff like that. So I think it's fantastic. I have a couple more people that I plan on interviewing with and sharing this stuff. I'm glad that we have this forum here, the Global Enlightenment Radio Network. It's this is all wonderful. I'm glad at all the connections that are being made. But I found out recently through some of these people that are communicating now that the techniques for the remote viewing, they're not that easy to come across. You know, the actual training, they're for sale. You know, this is.
I have copies as PDFs. Well, it's a combination of PDF and a video. And I have real trouble with it because part of my particular skill set is bilocation, which is so much easier for me than the protocol for remote viewing. So, yeah, I had a hell of a time with remote viewing.
Yeah, remote viewing is a very technical process. You know,
Yes.
it's like a recipe. If you follow it, it will work, but you have to follow it. It's precise.
It's precise, and if you bilocate, you cheat the system.
Oh, fair enough, but that's it's no discount to the fact that the remote viewing process is inherently a strict process.
It is. It is so strict that it was scientifically verifiable, and the programs that are under the umbrella of STARGATE had an 85% accuracy rate. It was so high that the CIA was charging other government agencies for their services with this one program. This one program was paying for beaucoup others.
Yep. This is one of the things that I came across that was, I guess, a massive reconnect for me was some of the steps that I've been coming across in the remote viewing process are, I mean, it's dead reckoning. As I'm seeing them now, it's like, oh yeah, I remember doing that now. The ideograms, for example. I have never in my life heard that term, I would say, since grammar school. Apparently, I mean, it's not a common use term, it's not a common activity to write some things down and then manufacture what appears to be a senseless squiggly line and then discern a whole bunch of magical information out of it. You know, a lot of people wouldn't really get what's going on there, but yet, you know.
Yeah, I was in a different program and we did that too. And I've gotten into trouble when I was in school, and I'm a generation older than you are, and the schools were not equipped for a child like I was, and I'd be sitting there taking notes in squiggles during class, and they were like, "What are you doing, girl?"
It's a different way of doing things, and it's something that now, from my perspective, right? I'm watching a video, they're bringing this ideogram thing up and talking about this technique, and I'm basically having flashbacks going, yeah, I absolutely remember getting trained on that now, and just like you said earlier, you don't remember these things. I didn't remember that. It happened. I didn't remember it in the slightest until I watched this video with this other person doing it, and then seeing it was just this instantaneous, brought me right back to the library and grammar school. And that whole idea, and I've said this in other videos, I mean, this is literally me deciphering my experience in real time on your show, is that previously I have discussed, I think it might have been on Elka's show, I'm not sure, that part of the issue for my childhood perspective of what was going on in that library was they weren't explaining to me what was going on. They were using me to remote view, but they weren't telling me what they were doing.
Tell today's audience what you were involved in elementary school.
I was in the Monroe Institute Gateway Project through my elementary years as a child. To the best of my recollection, is long as I can remember, they would bring me into the library and train me on things that I now know. In hindsight, as Monroe Institute remote viewing and techniques from Itzhak Bentov's Stalking the Wild Pendulum. At the time, since the adults weren't explaining this to me, my childhood perspective was that we would go into the library and nonsense would occur. I mean, you going on with this remote viewing because someone explained it. But you can appreciate that if no one explained it to you, they simply said, write these numbers down, make a squiggly line, pick words off of this list. Don't worry, any word is okay. There's nothing that you can do is wrong. That's remote viewing.
That is remote viewing, yes.
I didn't know that as a kid. I thought it was nonsense questions and answers time that, you know, but now I know.
As an adult going through it, what I remember of the protocol is you are given a set of numbers that that they call coordinates, but they're actually made up numbers.
Yeah, it's just a control mechanism.
It's just to make it double blind.
Yep.
And they give you these so-called coordinates that aren't, but they're looking at a photograph of the site, usually.
Mm-hmm.
And they give you these numbers and they tell you, don't even think about them, just draw what comes up.
Right.
Or draw the squiggle if nothing comes up.
Right.
And then pick words from this list, which may or may not apply to it.
Right.
And over 85% of the time, what you draw or what you squiggle and then choose words actually relates to the photograph of the site. Mm-hmm. And they found they don't even have to have a photograph. They can use this procedure to look at, there's a thing online where that they look in the past at Mars at the time of the disaster, and they watch while a group of native Martians die from oxygen deprivation.
The average Joe is going to be very surprised at what can be accomplished by remote viewing. And, you know, Lynn Buchanan, Ingo Swann, Pat Price, what those guys did at the front end was massive.
It was incredibly massive. They were using this technique to spy on the Russians and now the Chinese, because remote viewers cannot be blocked. Now, I've heard people tell me, oh yes, they can block you, they can block you. No, they can't. They can't block me. They can follow me home and give me hell, but they can't block me.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and there is a lot said for double-blind study activities that also showed that you can utilize remote viewing for influencing things both in the past, in the future, and then thusly the present as well.
You can influence things in the present with it.
Time space is a very twisted thing that a lot of people can't really wrap their head around yet. I would be very hard pressed to try to put two words in a way that would explain it. I would just simply state that time and space as presented to everyone is not accurate.
Not accurate at all.
That's about as much as I could explain to folks.
Time is much more flexible than people think it is, and time loops are very easy to accomplish, and the formation of alternate timelines is not easy. People think it is, but it isn't. They think every decision they make makes a new one. That's not true. A timeline is a sentient being and resists change.
So with that being said, would it be fair to extrapolate from that logic that once this difficult task of manufacturing an alternate timeline has been accomplished, that the removal or collapsing of that timeline would be similarly challenging?
Yeah. A lot of the issues that we're facing in the world today are because there is a synthetic timeline that certain groups are trying to apply over our organic one.
I can imagine.
And both timelines are resisting this, and yet there's a lot of force being applied to merge the two.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there's more force being applied for the synthetic one to replace the organic one.
Understood.
And that's a lot of the problems going on in the world today are from that.
I'm glad you put it that way, because that's kind of where my brain goes. Is I agree with you that there seems to be more momentum to that activity. So I think of things simply like Newton's laws of motion, that activity will continue to gain momentum until you can show me the equal and opposite force working against it.
Well, there is an opposite force working against it, and is why it hasn't been accomplished yet.
Okay.
But the folks pushing it are stronger at the moment than the ones resisting. So it's a bit of a challenge.
Correct. And that's kind of where I'm seeing it at right now as well, is that we just need more of a resistance to that momentum.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
So that's one of the underlying themes in my entire radio show is resist the New World Order.
Yeah. Yeah.
Resist the New World Order, resist the sentient AI, and put a stop to child trafficking. And since the Monroe Institute was using your services without payment or your father's knowledge or consent, that could be considered a form of child kidnapping.
It could be considered a form of a lot of things. It does really make me wonder, what are the ramifications for stuff like that? Like who do I have the conversation with? You know, I honestly don't know where to begin on that. You know?
Yeah, this was
appropriately as a child in a government program. Now what do I do?
Yeah. I'm kind of in that situation too. I was used inappropriately in a government program as a child and ongoing as an adult without my consent.
Yeah, and people don't hear that in the slightest. Oh, you think you're being messed with as an adult? Well, yeah, I got messed with as a kid. I'm pretty sure they're kind of having a blast for a while.
As Ingo Swann put it, once they know you have these abilities, they never let you go. They will work you to death.
Mm-hmm.
I've had that experience as well.
It is a very interesting thing. I'm learning a lot about what this remote viewing, energy is, so to say, in that it is a skill set, and that they certainly they had programs to look for the right people for these programs. I mean, that in and of itself was a program. That's how important this stuff was and how much they dialed it in. So I know
and they still are.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's what people really need to understand, and I think that's why I wanted to discuss today Signs of the Times, because I do not think in the slightest that these programs stopped, and the more that I'm digging, the more I believe they just go deeper. That seems to be par for the course, is that all of these organizations, whether it's the DIA, the CIA, the NSA, they all, at some point in time, they had their hands on this ball, on this gateway program. And basically, they all know that it worked. But what winds up happening is it gets to a point where now they all know that it works so well, they all kind of have the ability to do it, but they still don't want the tech going public, so everything just goes massively deeper. They pull it out of all the programs, and you'll find a teeny little paper trail after decades of all of these factions using this technology. You'll find a teeny little paper trail at the end that goes, oh, by the way, now, after all of that money, time, and everything invested, we've decided that it really didn't bear any fruit, and it was a total waste of time and money and effort. Right now, we just figured that out. So right now, we're going to stop it 100% entirely, forever and ever and ever. Right?
And then they made a movie, Men Who Stare at Goats.
Yeah, because it was a big joke, it never worked, and it's just funny, and it was a bunch of dudes doing acid and tripping out. That's all it ever was.
Except that the kids never used acid. Russell Targ talks about that one of the women that they were using as a control turned out to be one of the most talented remote viewers he'd ever seen, that she had 98% accuracy.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing of it, too. I was watching, Lynn Buchanan was speaking. Here's a very interesting thing with this remote viewing technique and just information gathering in particular. Like, this is just standard intel. So he said that you can have a group of remote viewers. Let's say you have 10 remote viewers. Let's say each of these remote viewers is only 10% accurate individually, okay? He said each one of them might have a specialty. So our viewer number one might have the skill set of being dead accurate on just color. Terrible at everything else, but they nail color every time. Remote viewer number two might be good with what's the temperature in that area, but never hit anything else ever. But this is why the science of remote viewing was a lot to do with just the practice. Just like practicing a guitar, anybody can become an expert on the guitar if you practice. But it takes assessment, it takes somebody listening to what you're doing, giving criticisms, and growing. So the remote process really tolerated this, and it's a lot more profound than people think.
And most people have the ability to do at least one aspect, like you were describing.
Yes, most people will have a specialty. So that's the thing, too, is it really was a simple thing for the government to function this intel operation in an extremely compartmentalized fashion, so that, the participants weren't even informed to what they were doing. And I've produced the consent forms for Stargate states very clearly that the participants do not have to be knowing. It said in it they can be knowing or unknowing participants. Yeah.
I remember reading that. You passed that around when we spoke at the Adams Center.
Yeah.
It also doesn't have an age limit on the participants.
Too. That is very correct. And I was watching one of the original participants. His last name was Dames, if I remember correctly.
Oh, yes. I know him.
So
I email with him.
Oh, excellent. I've been picking up some RV techniques from his training and everything.
His training is rather expensive, but works.
10-4. and like I said, these are all very technical things, and this is why it's hard to come by, because it's copyrighted technical information. But the stuff that I'm finding is interesting from him. And then in one of the videos, he was doing an RV session with a 12-year-old boy. And in the session, the boy was doing an exceptional job. Dames was congratulating him, you know, being a good person to he was handling in the exchange. And basically, the boy, in the exchange of giving him kudos, he said, "And how is it that you've gained this confidence in this skill set?" And the boy answered, "Well, he's gained his confidence because this is something that he's been practicing now for many years." Mm-hmm. So again, it just, and granted, this I believe was a relative of Dame's. So I'm not trying to impress that this was a child that was there unknowingly or in any way, shape, or form under duress. I'm just trying to intimate that the program can be ascertained and functioned with ease by a child.
I think we need to mention here, because so many of these psionics type programs are based on genetics. Remote viewing is not. There are people on YouTube of every race and gender who are practicing remote viewing with incredible results.
Yes. Yep. It is something completely different. It is, I would say, more natural.
Yeah. It's more natural than telepathy and some of the other abilities that are out there.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not knocking any other system, like you had mentioned. There are some shortcuts, and I will say that's life. That happens, right? But just like in life, shortcuts oftentimes come with pitfalls, and I do believe that the technical aspect of the remote viewing process, people should consider that has afforded almost like a technical safety aspect to it. It's a safer way of working this information by following this technical process. It is effective. It does take more time, but in a way, it's more of it's more craftsman-like.
It's more confirmable scientifically.
That's part of the process. If you are doing remote viewing properly, it is a referenceable science.
Yeah, it is. Where bilocation is not.
Fair enough.
There's no way I can prove to a third party that I was actually bilocated and one place physically and another place consciously.
And in the grand scheme of gathering intel, I would say it doesn't really matter. If you came back with the right info, I couldn't prove you weren't there. Right? That's kind of what remote viewing did. This is what the STARGATE program was doing. Was they didn't care. They were not asking the question, how does this work? They were very convinced that remote viewing worked. They were
my program did care how you did it, because you had to do it their way. And if you didn't, there were punishments.
Oh, well, I agree that the process for the program needs to be followed, but again, it was just for the express purposes of getting the function out of it, not describing how they got the function. You know, it's like if you have a manual of operations that teaches you how to drive a car, you're certainly going to get in and follow the manual because that's how you drive a car. But that manual and those directions don't necessarily explain to you how the engine works.
This is true.
STARGATE program didn't give a damn how the engine worked. They just wanted to drive the car.
Exactly. And I'm trying to explain that for the people who are going to ask us how the engine works.
Right. It's completely in their paperwork. They did not care. They were going to sidestep that 100%. They were taking it for granted. There's something going on, and it is going on. They can prove it's going on, and all they cared about was, I guess, not weaponizing it, so to say, but as an intel tool, so to say. They wanted to...
They wanted to utilize it.
Utilize it would be better.
To have it as part of the toolbox available to all of the intelligence agencies, and they were charging for it. So this was an actual thing.
I'd be very interested to see the numbers on that. If you could ever come across anything that shows the rates.
I have something like that in my files, but it's from the 50s. Now, when I was at your house, we talked about how the program changed names over time. Do you have that information on the top of your head, or on a...
I know a lot about it. Do you have a more specific question?
My specific question would be, at what years was it called STARGATE, and then switched to something else, and then switched to something else, and at what year did you lose track of the records?
I could not tell you right off the top of my head at which point each of them changed, but it seemed to be about maybe every 5 years it would swap from one department, so whether it was DIA, CIA, Army, Air Force, Navy, whether they called it scanning, whether they called it grill flame, whether they called it Operations Center Lane. Basically, every time it would change hands or get a security clearance change, they would also have to change the program name. And a lot of this had to do, from what my studies show, was the funding. That it was kind of a hot potato. It was a hot topic. People didn't want to have their programs aligned with it for two reasons. One, it totally worked. That gave them great intel, and that also brought them great attention. So it was almost like it brought too much focus on their department, it seems. Like, these are people that are in top secret stuff.
And it's shining a flashlight on them.
Yeah, so it seems like from what I'm gathering is that a lot of these people were really excited that they got a hold of this technology. They were like, wow, this is amazing. It's the most amazing thing in the world. But then the problem was that it caused everyone to then focus on what the heck they were up to. And that just destroyed whatever it was they were now trying to accomplish. So it was like everybody needed to figure out a way to work with this technology, but convince everyone they weren't working with this technology. It's not me. Those guys have it now, not us. And then everybody, no, we don't have it. Those guys have it. You know? And now all of a sudden, everybody's walking around going, "Oh, no, it's no one's using it anymore."
And part of that was because Congress started looking at the funding for this and going, "We're paying for psychics."
Yeah, well, funding is something that the American people are going to have to really wrap their heads around in the not too distant future, because it's really silly. It's so silly that people really believe that the way Congress cuts checks and the way these organizations use that money is as presented. So I'm sorry, if you think that the Congress cuts a check to the CIA once a year, I don't know, $70 billion, I don't know, what's the ridiculous number? What do you think it is? I'll yield to whatever number you think it is. What do you think the CIA gets a check for every year?
I think the CIA gets a check and supplements that check with any number of illegal, immoral, unethical operations, such as dealing drugs, such as dealing arms, such as trafficking children, such as trafficking adults.
Yep.
Anything. If there's money out there for it, the CIA is doing it.
if they think that the CIA needs the Congress to cut them a check next year for them to stay in business, people have not been paying attention to the world around them at all.
No, they haven't. The CIA became independent of the United States government, I'm going to guess somewhere under Ronald Reagan.
Fair enough.
And that was at the point, just after the point of the Church Commission, where the Church Commission, named after Senator Church, had the investigations into MK Ultra and into the CIA assassinating foreign leaders.
I almost think back just a hair prior to that. Think about when Carter was in there and the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations people came flooding into his stuff out of nowhere. Wasn't that when George Sr. was head of something?
George Sr. had been part of the CIA from before the time of the Kennedy assassination. Mm-hmm. And he worked his way up the ladder, and when he ran for president, there were a lot of people who refused to vote for him because he had run the CIA. Mm-hmm. And I was one of those.
Yeah, it just makes me wonder, with him in such proximity to that time period, if it was just maybe a hair closer.
Yeah, he was. There are folks who talk about when Reagan was shot, because there was an assassination attempt on him, and the man who did it was related to the Bush family.
He definitely had connections. Yeah, absolutely.
And so he's still in a mental prison facility for shooting Reagan. And people who shoot presidents end up in prison for a very long time. And they painted him as crazy when I really think he was chosen by his family to do this.
Yeah, I think that was some sort of massive conspiracy was going on there. You have the former head of the CIA as your vice president, and all the conversations that Reagan had prior to his election, and then the switch to that running mate, and then it's not a far stretch to say that maybe the Bushes might have wanted to whack this guy so the Bush could be president.
Yeah, it's not a stretch at all. The last time...
Well, the street is the Clintons like to kill people. I mean... Maybe there's some other family that's in a similar circumstance that's just willing to shed blood to get their way to the top. I mean, maybe history might show that this has happened before on the planet.
History has shown that this is rather common behavior among the ruling elites.
But I'm a conspiracy theorist because I think there still might be people around that would be willing to shed the blood of thousands to maintain their power.
Yeah. And worst of it is, I come from that bloodline. When I did my family tree, it was like, oh my God, I'm descended from monsters.
One of the things that I wanted to bring up in the Stargate Gateway tag program, gate program for the gifted kids, all of these things that we discuss, right? That there is specificity to it, right? So now this remote viewing stuff, I'm learning that I have recollections of the tasking and the line items, because it is that specific, thank goodness. So now I have...
It is specific, yes.
Yep, so I've exposed myself to it, so I have a recollection. So it makes me wonder how many other people, if they saw this stuff, would have the same dead reckoning. I've looked into the SSP thing, so I've had ideas re-presented to me in my firsthand experience to then bring me back to those things. But now I wonder how many people have had these exposures but don't have the recollection because in their contemporary state, there's nothing crossing their field of vision that caused them to have that recollection.
Well, I think that's why some of us are hassled on social media.
10-4. But now
to prevent that happening.
I want to know what your thoughts are and anybody else's thoughts on what we might start to consider would be things that this average person, right?
Yeah.
What are they going to start to notice in their waking state? Because I do believe that there is, let's say, this waking up process going on for the GATE kids, okay? So I believe there's going to be confusion, but what I'm trying to do is maybe figure out a way to alleviate that confusion. If we can start, as this new batch of GATE kids is theoretically waking up, I would like to communicate with them and talk and find out, how did you feel? How did you figure out what happened? And if we can start to, I guess, make the top 3, top 5, top 10 things that they need to feel, to consider, to look for, to maybe help the average Joe. That's all, was what I was thinking. And I really like the RV stuff. I think people really need to expose themselves to that more. And I think people should start conversing about what remote viewing is, what its capabilities are, what are these techniques. If it's just as simple technically as playing a guitar, I would imagine a lot of people should start taking up and playing the guitar. Because to me, it's about as useful to society. Imagine if we never had guitars before, and all of a sudden somebody walked out and goes, here's a guitar. Oh, and by the way, any of you can learn to use this. Well, I would also say at that point in time, well, I think it's important that some people figure out how to use this, because now we have guitars.
Yes.
I believe that remote viewing is an extremely valuable instrument. So much so that I think it's very obvious that many factions of our government and our commercial corporate environment have obviously spent large fortunes to prevent the vast majority of people from being aware that this instrument actually exists and functions the way that it does.
Well, I have a small issue with it becoming really widely used, in that there is no firewall for it. You cannot block someone from remote viewing you. And in March, I had a real issue with someone remote viewing me in my home, lying about what he saw, and then I caught him remote viewing me in the shower. And yes, if you can bilocate, you can see other people who are bilocating.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be an agreed upon ethical system where that you don't just go invade someone's personal privacy.
I totally understand what you're saying. You're 100% right. This is the challenge of this new paradigm that we're entering, is that this is how strong this technique is. You're right, it cannot be blocked. There is no firewall. That presents massive challenges because it presents us technically in a world where there's no such thing as secrets.
There's no such thing as personal privacy.
Correct.
Because this man was looking at my body in the shower.
I get that, and this, I mean...
And as a female in a society that does not generally value us, mm-hmm. This is predatory behavior.
In our society, I understand that would be our mental challenges. But as you know, off this planet, out of this society, many would consider that a hang-up because they function in these circumstances where they would say, and what? What's the issue? Because they're already doing this. They already live in this non-privacy environment. They already have this ability to interact and engage in this way. They're already doing it. We're, I guess, in a way, a rung down on the ladder. I don't know how to put it.
But at the same time, as long as the society treats females as prey, or vice versa.
Oh, totally understood. I mean, that's a massive.
And there needs to be some sort. This whole issue has to be addressed.
You are correct.
It can no longer be swept under the rug.
As far as I'm concerned, this entire planet is from top to bottom. My description of this planet is it's extremely abusive to the human children it makes, because I don't see any of them getting out unscathed.
Mm-mm.
So with that being said,
that was something that
humanity is in charge of this planet, because humanity wouldn't treat humanity this way.
Humanity is not in charge on this planet, and I can't prove it to anyone's satisfaction, but the system as it was presented to me is that humanity is underneath the Anunnaki, who are still here, and that they are underneath the Draco, who have been just coming in, collecting their taxes. They do not have a hands-on relationship with us, and that they are underneath the Guardians, who are the military police of the Galactic Authority. This is the hierarchy that we live under. Now, humans tend to call Anunnaki angels. They're not. They're 3D physical beings. Humans tend to call Draco demons. They're not. They're 3D physical beings. And the Guardians are also 3D physical beings. So, I do not spiritualize it at all. But everybody around me does.
Yeah. I just think that that's a quick way to scapegoat the conversation too soon. It's unfortunate that, people like to jump to deity and religion and stuff like that. And
that's because they can't deal with the physical reality of it.
Or they don't have the answers, I find. That's what they use when they lack answers to things. They fill in the gap with God and deity and religion and
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's a simple answer to everything.
Yeah.
It seems like every time they dig a hole in the ground, they find a building and they go, well, what is it for? Well, obviously they built it to their gods. I mean, that's
obviously.
Yeah.
And then you dig around for a while and you find out it's a storage area for food.
Yeah. Thank God.
Yeah. Warehouses.
One of my
Warehouses. Libraries. Universities. They're not all temples.
Yeah. Lots of bathhouses, lots of fountains. A lot of people don't understand the tech in all of these things that they're looking at right before their very eyes in antiquity. We really don't give credit to our ancestors. So myself as a plumber and a student of plumbing through the ages, one of the things a lot of people have never really picked up on, this really blows my mind. They don't understand air conditioning and the fountains that were used.
Mm-hmm.
That was air conditioning. So the fountains,
air conditioning. So were the parks that had trees.
Yeah. They could enclose a fountain. So if you had a top reservoir and you needed to aqueduct, that's the term they used back in the day. That means piping. That's an antiquated term for a pipe. So I'm a plumber. I'm familiar with piping. So when you have ceramic piping, aqueduct, running from the top of the mountain down, you can only go down so far before that column of water creates so much pressure that you'll start blowing that pipe out. So that's where they turn the line up, and as it's coming down, it becomes a fountain. So that's your atmospheric pressure reducer, because you're now breaking to atmosphere. That's spraying up now into an enclosed area. You're causing the atomization, and that will now cool that area that you have the fountain in, and then it goes back down into the basin, into another pipe, downhill, until, again, pressure builds up again, and you have another atmospheric break, which is also another fountain, which is another air. Like our ancestors had fresh water, they had air conditioning, they had all the things that we desire.
They had sewers.
They had everything, and they used less energy to accomplish it, and everybody nowadays just has no idea how things can really function. We've become so dependent on technology for things that we've lost the idea of craftsmanship and technique. And this brings us right back to our conversation today, because Gateway, Stargate, started out as technique. And they learned a lot about the human mind. And they mapped how things worked. And they did things on an individual level through technique and practice. Now, I believe things have changed. I believe they took those techniques and turned them into technologies. So now these technologies are not targeting the individuals like previously with the technique. Now we have technologies hitting people in mass, so I want to try to figure out what would be the correlation for how someone might, through technology, understand what would be a technique that was previously applied. Does that make sense?
I have a question for you. This is not, and this is going to fit into my answer to yours. What year did you lose track of these programs?
Oh, yes, I forgot to answer that part before. I'm so sorry. 1994 seems to be the time period that I would say that the Gateway program, TAG, all that stuff just went deep, where everybody seemed to say that they wrapped it up.
Okay. My experience, 1981, V2K, otherwise known as synthetic telepathy, became an issue in my world.
Okay.
I was hearing a voice that claimed to be God. And that never went away until I started using my cap.
Okay.
And my cap has nickel silver embedded in it. And so it is an effective Wi-Fi block.
Okay.
What I have seen that has replaced remote viewing has been synthetic telepathy over a Wi-Fi carrier.
Okay.
And as the cell phone system has expanded, so has the reach of this technology. And it feeds back into computers operated by the CIA. And it's a two-way link. So instead of you having to read what's at such and such a site, they can just tap into somebody that's there.
Could you be using, I feel like a kindergarten teacher, using the best descriptive words you have, Penny, could you explain the difference of having your hat on or off?
Having my hat off means that the Wi-Fi from my modem over here can connect the CIA computer directly into my earbones. And they can send a Wi-Fi signal that my earbones will pick up as words. And if they do it correctly, I will think their thoughts without realizing they're not mine.
10-4.
And they can pick up my responses.
So
the cap physically blocks that.
Okay. So when the cap is not on and that connection occurs, from your perspective, the voice sounds like you or someone else.
To me, it sounds like someone else. I have always heard a man's voice in my head with it.
Gotcha. 10-4?
So I have always heard a man's voice. Baritone level.
Okay.
American. Very smooth.
10-4. It's it's my belief, and again, I think that folks like yourself and myself were targeted and growing processes. It's my belief that the maximum level of the technology would have that activity occurring in people's ears, but now in their own voice.
Okay. That actually makes sense. That would make it even more challenging to tell the difference. And that is why I personally tell any channeler who is going to speak with me, wear a Wi-Fi blocking cap while you do it, or I'm not going to listen because I'm going to assume you're channeling the CIA, and I already get to listen to them.
Yep. So here's one of the things that I like to make a connection. I'm going to throw it way, way, way back, and I know you're going to dig this because you're a student of history as well. Okay? So
if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Exactly. So we're going to do a little thought experiment here, and you can follow along. So now, RV, remote viewing, is a real thing, right?
Yes.
Real thing now, it'll be a real thing in the future, and it has been a real thing in the past, right?
Yes.
So, in antiquity, if there was a time period where remote viewing had been flourishing because the people were trained and more advanced, however you want to put it, right? A society that did have remote viewing plentiful in its society. So they would be, like you stated earlier, without privacy.
Yes.
Okay? And yet we're also told that in antiquity we had, a fall of man. Okay?
Yeah. The fall of man that's based on sex.
Well, yeah, and yes, there's lots of ways to look at it. But ultimately, in all of the ancient mystery schools, most of the ancient mystery schools, there's a very common theme, which I would suggest might be remote viewing oriented. You know this term. Know thyself.
Uh-huh.
Because I would suggest that the ultimate power that could be wielded through both the technique of remote viewing or the technology that has grown from it would be that if you're not extremely careful, if that voice in your head sounds like you, can you divine out your own original thoughts from your own? Can you know thyself that well? If I had the ability, I had a device where I could type into my computer and it spoke to you in your head, in your voice, I could give you very challenging days.
To put it mildly.
To put it very mildly. And yet, that technology would be very desirable for folks to figure out.
The technology was trying to coerce me into killing myself.
Oh, understood.
So we're talking about extremely challenging days.
And imagine if it was in your own voice. That would be a lot more challenging.
That would explain the high current suicide rates.
Mm-hmm. And that's my curiosity, is that I'm concerned that if these technologies do exist, do the people that would be impacted have the wherewithal to resist? And I would suggest no. I mean, who's going to be able to...
This was used in...
that they don't know is happening, and especially...
This was used in warfare in 1989. It was used on the Iraqi army during the war in Kuwait. And they not only heard the voice in their head, but they were given a holographic picture of Allah standing over the American soldiers while they were hearing a voice in their language telling them, "I am Allah, put down your weapons and surrender."
I had never
And
heard,
they did.
I had never heard the hologram part of that story. The rest of it I was familiar with. I had never heard anyone say the hologram part of that story. If you could share a link or something with me on that one, I would just really appreciate it. I'm not doubting you. I just want to.
I'll have to hunt it down. But
okay, that's cool. That's a good one. I never heard that part because I am aware that I'm completely aware that technology does exist today and is intended to do things like that. So this is the first I've ever heard of it actually being used in the battlefield way back then.
There were stories way back then of our American planes heading for Baghdad to end Saddam Hussein during this 1989 war, and they saw archangels blocking their path. Now, I personally would question, were those holograms as well?
Very possible. Yeah, at this stage of the game, the technology exists. So questioning things and asking for more info, I would say, is always advisable.
This technology has existed for a hell of a long time. It became public, about 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, if that. Public is a relative term.
If it's told to the public, it's been in use in the military for at least 20 to 30 years before that, and has been replaced by a better technology.
Oh yeah, it's actually I came across I was following some tech stuff, and there were some folks discussing quantum computers and processing and intel transfer.
Okay.
And again, this is my experience, so I'm just going to put it out there. These are the things that I'm learning. They were discussing that quantum computers, and in the future they'll use an info stream where it's a single line of photons, basically. So that if that photon stream if someone attempts to tap it, that when they have this technology in the future, that by trying to tap this photon stream, it allows the end user to know that someone's trying to tap their info. So you will be to be informed when someone is attempting to gain access to your info. It gives them the choice to, I guess, change their info or shut it down, but then, the people, but that's how Intel works. But the really interesting thing was they were discussing this new idea of how to do this, and again, with clarity that it's in the future. And I'm sitting here watching this, and I'm going, that's not, I was trained on this. I've done this. I've worked on this system. I've already been told how this works decades ago. I remember being told about this. Now, more than that, I'll have to think more. I'll have to make more connections. But, in my past, I worked for folks, and in my past, we had comm systems, and in my past, I was told how my comm system worked, and that's what they explained it as.
Yeah.
This is really cool thing, really cool, and you can't be compromised. And if it turns out someone's paying attention, we're going to know they're paying attention. Oh, well, what do we do? Turn it off? No, we don't turn it off. We change the info stream.
Of course. You change the info stream, you feed them false information, and they go away happy.
Yeah, and then you pay attention to where that info shows up. I mean, it's just...
Exactly. I have people in my world that I'm pretty sure that they're disinfo agents. And so I feed them stories that are technically true, because I don't lie to people on purpose. But it will be a story that I've not told anyone else, and so I watch where it goes.
Yeah.
And that's something I learned to do as a church mouse.
Because churches are full of good people that would never gossip about each other, right?
If you believe that, I have a bridge in Oakland I'd like to interest you in.
Oh, bless your heart. I love that phrase.
And from your older part of the world, it would be a bridge in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
A bridge in Brooklyn I'd like to sell you.
Yeah. That's a very old phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And I adapt it for California. But yeah, everything that I have investigated my entire life, it hasn't taken very long to scratch down to a layer that is absolutely pure corruption, and churches are no different.
Mm-hmm.
Even your local congregation.
Mm-hmm.
Start looking into how money is actually spent, and you will find corruption. Start looking into who has influence in that congregation, and it will always be the person who is donating the most.
Yeah, and lest we forget, my STARGATE program happened in the parochial school that I was attending, which was, now in hindsight, extremely shady. And in part of my research, I mean, that facility was odd. I mean, there are things happening to me that shouldn't have been happening, is what it is. So now it's on my radar.
Yeah. I went to California public schools back in the 1960s, and there were a lot of things going on there as well, including once a year I would be pulled into the principal's office for a week, and usually there were from 6 to 8 other kids brought in at the same time, and we would be given IQ tests and psi ability tests and such things, and then we would be put back in class with nothing said about the results. Mm-hmm. My father would I would tell my dad what was going on, and he would contact the school afterwards and ask for the results. And so
I can't recall if I asked you before, but did you receive eye drops like I did when you went to your GATE stuff or your MK stuff? Either one of those? Do you have any recollection of eye drops?
My MK stuff was all done at Langley, and 1959 to 1964, and I have no recollection of eye drops.
Okay.
I have recollection of being electrocuted and waking up in the regen tank when I failed to produce expected results.
Yeah.
But I had a very hard time following the protocol.
And for?
Once I finally told them how mine worked, they accepted that what I was doing was not protocol but worked. And then I stopped being tortured for it. I was probably 8 years old when I finally convinced them bilocation was interfering with remote viewing.
Could you explain to me the difference? I have a loose recollection of the term bilocation coming up often in the library where I was doing the Monroe Institute stuff, but I can't really recall the context. So could you explain to me what your definition of bilocation is in comparison to remote viewing?
Remote viewing, you're accessing the coordinates and being shown whatever link you make with those numbers. Bilocation is bypassing those numbers and going to the site and taking a look around and then describing it.
I'm trying to put together with what I know of myself and what I know of other things. And I'll just be straight with you. I was a punk kid. So.
Well, I wasn't an angel either.
Fair enough. So it's like hearing you say this in my mind's eye. I can almost, and this is how I guess these memories come back, is we have feelings that go with them. So as you're saying this, it's
trust the feelings.
Right. So I feel like my recollection is I feel like I might have been getting in trouble for bilocating instead of remote viewing because I have a tendency to take shortcuts to just get to the results.
I could never connect to the numbers they gave me. And I would form a telepathic link with the person who had written the numbers, see where they were describing, see the picture, and then go to the place.
Okay.
So my physical body would stay where I was, but my conscious awareness would be somewhere else. Literally. It was like my body had just enough of me to keep it breathing.
Was there a time that you were switched from them attempting to train you in remote viewing to them supporting your ability to bilocate with appropriate training?
Yes.
Gotcha. So
and as part of the training for the bilocation came their awareness that I could go interdimensional and take physical objects with me.
Gotcha.
And that was when they started my navigation training.
Could you...
That's a very rare ability for humans, even ones who have been DNA modified like I was.
Totally got you, and that's the direction I'm going with this. Is my curiosity is what type of training would have been involved with the bilocating? What kind of techniques or skills? Is it as regimented or complex for that task, just different than remote viewing? I know you said it's a shortcut compared to remote viewing, so I gather it's got to be a shortened amount of steps.
Well,
but still written in those steps?
I don't know about other people.
Okay.
Okay? All I know is that for me, it is much easier to just leave the body and go. And when Lou and I first got together 20 years ago, I had told him how easy it was to just get up and leave. And he didn't believe me because being a shaman, he had interacted with lots of people before. And so I was at his house one evening, and my kids were all at some party or something, so I was at his house. And this was before we were officially together, and we had dinner, and we were listening to music, and I was sitting on the floor with my legs sprawled. And he comes up to me, and he puts his fingers not actually into my armpits, but close, and lifts. And I'm feeling me leave the body. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing to me? He says, I was just testing you because I couldn't believe you actually did this. And he said that as a shaman, he was aware that most people have anchor locks to hold them into their body, and that mine are missing. So that may be why it's easier for me.
Could very well be. Huh?
So this was a good 13 years before my memories of space were activated by the NSA. So I have had these anomalies all along. It's not like it was a big shock about space because I didn't understand that those programs actually existed. But knowing about the space programs explained the anomalies.
You actually brought up something that I want to discuss, which is aside from the topic of the day, but more in the big scheme of the whole SSP programming, and on a personal level, I think you're going to get a kick out of this.
Okay.
You mentioned to me and before that you had been, as you mentioned with the NSA, your I think you said your remember code or your awaken code.
Yeah.
At one point,
my remember code is used.
Yes, thank you. Your remember code was used, and you had divulged that, if I remember correctly, right? There was a time. And am I correct that you said was it Wizard of Oz?
My original programming with the mind fracture was based on Wizard of Oz, at least for the first primary altar.
Gotcha.
Now, different altars can be programmed with different things farther along.
Oh, dang it. Then my news is maybe not as awesome as I had hoped.
But, okay, that was my explanation for why the Trina Sophia of Saint Germain.
Oh yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that too.
Just when I read that at your house, it was like my altars were just rolling through like a Rolodex was being spun.
And I never wanted to bring that book up again until you were ready to talk about it.
I bought my own copy. It has pictures. It's sitting here. I have not gotten the courage up to read it.
I was very happy that you were profoundly impacted by that book, but I also understand that, when things happen like that, it's challenging.
I went blind in my left eye for over an hour. That was terrifying.
I like that.
I had absolutely no control over it. I have figured out that it was the words in Hebrew that triggered it.
Strong language.
So apparently some of my altars were programmed with that book.
Not currently going to divulge, because obviously I will keep that close to my chest for the time being. But I was very proud of myself to figure that one out before being utilized against me, so I can certainly strengthen and be more prepared. This is the benefit of communicating with folks and deciphering my experience in real time, because people are being very helpful and connections are being made. So I want to thank the folks.
I've been more careful about exposing what my remember code was because it was used for others as well, and I don't want to dump them awake like I was.
Understood.
I'm trying to be more responsible as I go through this process. I mean, you know as well as I do, when you first come into this world, you're freaking out and you just can't stop talking.
Understood. Yeah, it's a montage of complexity that's very hard to wrap your head around. It's very hard to find a spot, so to say, where you can just simply sit down, breathe, and try to get comfortable with just like a fraction of the things that could have potentially impacted someone by being in these families, this stuff, like, it has a statistical background. If you're from this type of family, if you have this type of lineage, this type of blood, well, guess what? You're going to start hitting all these check marks, and there's only a matter of time before, guess what? You're in the program. You don't have to like it. You don't have to know about it. You don't have to remember anything about it. That technically means the program worked correctly.
Yeah. Those of us who remember, it means something happened wrong.
Right.
It means they fucked up.
Or the way I look at it is something happened right.
In my case, I was a happy little truther, and all of a sudden, the NSA decided to activate my altar.
I'm going in the direction that maybe that this power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at it like a Pandora's box in a way from their perspective. They go taking children and teaching them this power, right?
Yeah.
This equation, we have a room full of people and a power being wielded. In your assessment of humanity, which people in that room do you think would maintain the highest level of morals? The children or the adults?
The children.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if
because
somebody...
the adults are doing this to children in the first place.
Correct. So, who are the people with the power in the room?
The children.
Wrap your head around that one for a while. There's good intentioned people with massive power at a particular period of time.
Yeah, they've got
and you're
a lot
saying
of
the timelines. You said earlier on that timelines are hard to build.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to suggest that the high moral standard of the integrated minds of children of yesteryear may have functionally applied their intents and accomplished a lot for us.
Oh, yeah.
And that we may be seeing signs of this through the waking of these gate kids. There's another term I'm seeing get thrown around the internet as of late. I'm curious if you've heard it, what your familiarity is, or your thoughts on the idea. But the term cicada or a cicada agent being applied to these...
I haven't seen that one.
The idea is that these children did accomplish something in as so far as giving themselves a skill set, an out, and a time period that they would re-emerge like a cicada, like a locust, that they would just bury, go deep and down, take their everything, just go away, and they will be back.
Well, let's hope they're on the side of humanity when they do.
I would imagine that their morals wouldn't tolerate anything other than wanting to help children.
Well, that's my main goal for all of my disclosure, was getting this stopped at being done to children.
It would appear to me that this is the time period where that mentality is waking up.
Good.
And I really think that this is a time and place and a spirit, so to say, for a new paradigm of people accepting that these things did happen and that we need to do something about it, because this privacy veil is getting removed. And they're not going to be able to hide. I mean, the program's not hidden anymore as available. The CIA website, you know, the video, I put a video up this week, I don't know if you saw it, but to show people how to go to the CIA website and mine it for data, you know.
I went through a phase where I was doing that, and I recently shared my, I have a Google Drive that has the background for a presentation I do. I have it's basically not just the bibliography, it's the whole files for each of the things that I reference in that presentation, plus supporting data. And the file's probably a gigabyte or more. And that's not counting the videos. And those of you who know about the size of PDFs, you know that it's jam-packed. I recently shared that with Sonny Irvin. And he came back with oh shit, you have done work. So
There's so much information out there.
most of it's about Stargate and Grill Flame and the various morphing into of this particular grouping. But some of it is about mind control and the V2K programs, because when I was initially doing this research, I made the connection of you can't trace it past 94. Well, what happened in 94? What happened just before 94 that they decided that they didn't need this program anymore? And it was the weaponization of voice to skull, synthetic telepathy. That was the obvious successor program. Mm-hmm. And at that point in my world, I knew Robert Duncan, who was one of the forces behind Project Satan, which involves using Wi-Fi to overlay brain engrams on healthy brains and make them think they're dying of cancer.
Russell Targ, Paul Smith, and a couple of other gentlemen from the original remote viewing program. Mm-hmm. They were saying, this was news to me as well, but I just gathered this week. He said very clearly that when he started with Ingo Swann and the remote viewing program, as you and I are familiar with it, he said they had heard lingering stories that this was actually not the actual start of the program. That there were programs that were completely based in the United States Navy submarine program, because they obviously always considered communications to a submarine to be challenging and critical, so there was no stone left unturned ever when it came to the possibility of being able to commute with submariners. That those programs have always been going on at the highest level of technology, and that he was saying that he specifically was working with programs for the United States Navy Submarine Service, where they were working on being able to flash lights into his eyes to then have another submariner on the boat be able to see those flashes and then interpret accordingly and then communicate thus.
We mentioned earlier in our personal communications that I had contact with folks from various secret societies that the world knows as Illuminati. One of those men that I've had contact with presented me with an idea that I'm exploring. It's pretty hard to do all of the research online, so I can't give links at the moment. But his statement that I'm looking into was that all of these programs were started in the 1800s. And they were joint American and German programs. Mm-hmm. That the Sonora Aero Club was one of them, with the anti-grav engines. But that all of the programs that we now talk about from the 1950s to the 1990s, that all of these had predecessors in the 1800s, and that when the CIA started doing them, they said, oh, those guys don't know what they're talking about, and redid them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking into finding the evidence for that. So these programs may be 100 years older than we think.
Well, I'm tracking the snots out of the programs on Long Island and how they predate what we're told. You know, the German scientists and the American scientists were colluding on the North Shore, on the east end of Long Island, before the war, during the war, after the war. I mean, it was always ongoing. Eugenicism was Cold Spring Harbor, the North Shore of Long Island. Eugenics, the U.S. was leading in eugenics prior to World War II starting.
Well, what we've got...
We got mad at Hitler. We got a better program, and better just being a relative term, because he was trying to kill faster rate. But eugenics, as an idea or philosophy, was really an idea of thinning the herd.
I'm going to toss an idea out there for people to think about. America had considered Britain to be their enemy for their entire existence, having fought 2 wars with them, the Revolution and the War of 1812. Okay? We go into the Civil War, and Britain is on the side of the South, so it's still considered our enemy. The Germans were on the side of the North, so they were considered our ally at the time. We go into everything up to Teddy Roosevelt. When Teddy Roosevelt was president, we suddenly changed to being allies with Britain. Now, I understand there were treaties signed under FDR a generation later that basically put America back into alliance with the Queen, or actually the Crown Corporation of City of London. But I'm still looking for the documentation of what the hell happened under Teddy Roosevelt that we changed from being allies with Germany to being allies with Britain.
I wonder if that was just a pretend thingy, setting the stage for what's going to be happening down the pipe, because I do feel that, we as a mob mentality, we're a lot more short-sighted than the organized folks running the world. So I tend to make decisions like that and not try to think about what was happening in the local temporal space, so to say, but then what would be the long term. So if at some point in time Teddy Roosevelt made that switch, I would say, well, it wasn't for the time that it happened, it would be for a time after.
Yeah. Well, we have about 5 minutes left on the show, so let people know how to get hold of you.
Absolutely. You can reach me on YouTube to follow along with my videos, deciphering my experience. By all means, please comment. Let me know what you think about what I'm doing. Please like, please subscribe, and most importantly right now, since I'm deplatformed, if you can share this stuff and help spread the word, I would really appreciate it. If you want to be a bit more on the private side, which a lot of people have been reaching out to me, thank you very much. You can simply email me at decipheringme369@gmail.com. And I would love to hear from anybody about anything they got going on, especially if you are in these Stargate programs and you feel like you're getting some recollections. Don't hesitate to reach out. I did just pull up here, Penny. I don't know if it would actually work, but as I'm learning how to do things here with this Zoom, I believe that I can screen share with you. And I have